I still remember the day I met David as vividly as if it happened yesterday. The streets were crowded, people brushing past one another in their endless hurry, and I was annoyed, trying to navigate without ruining my dress. Then, bam! Someone collided with me so hard that the flowers in his hand scattered across the pavement. I was about to snap, ready to scold him, but then I looked at him. He had this awkward, almost boyish smile, his hair slightly messy, and eyes that held a sincerity I wasn't used to seeing. He stammered, "I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention." There was something disarming about him. Instead of staying angry, I found myself kneeling to pick up his flowers. The petals were bruised, yet he looked more worried about them than himself. We ended up walking together for a while. I don't even know why. I don't usually talk to strangers, but there was something different about David. He told me about his job at a printing shop, his love for sketching, and his dreams of becoming a designer. He spoke with such passion that I forgot the noise of the street around us. When we reached my corner, I surprised myself by saying, "I think I'd like to see you again." As he walked away, clutching his ruined bouquet, I caught myself smiling. I didn't know it then, but that clumsy encounter was the beginning of something that would change me, though not in the way I expected. Falling for David felt so effortless, like slipping into a dream where nothing could hurt me. He wasn't the kind of man I was used to. No expensive watches, no flashy cars, no air of arrogance. He was simple, almost too simple, but that was exactly what drew me in. He would wait for me outside the boutique where I worked, leaning against the wall with that easy smile of his, holding either roasted corn or a little sketch he had drawn during his lunch break. I'll never forget the first time he handed me a portrait of myself. It wasn't perfect, but his eyes lit up as though he had captured the essence of a queen. I laughed, but deep down, it touched me in ways I couldn't admit. Our weekends were the best. We would sit on the library steps, sharing stories, sometimes with nothing more than ground nuts between us. He had a way of making ordinary moments feel extraordinary. He made me believe in laughter again, in simplicity, in the raw purity of love. And yet, in quiet moments, doubt whispered. My friends often tease me, "Clara, how long will roasted corn satisfy you? Where's the car? Where's the lifestyle you deserve?" I laughed it off, pretending not to care, but sometimes when I compared my life with theirs, I wondered if love alone could carry me into the future I dreamed of. Still, whenever I looked into David's eyes, I silenced those thoughts. With him, I felt safe. With him, I felt seen. And I wanted to believe that was enough. Those months with David felt like stolen time from the heavens. The world outside might have been loud, demanding, and cruel, but whenever I was with him, it melted away. He took me to places I had never bothered to notice before. Quiet parks where the trees whispered secrets in the wind. Food stalls where he swore the suya was the best in the whole city. And hidden corners of the old library where he would sketch while I pretended to read. David didn't have much money, but he had imagination. And somehow, he made the ordinary glow. One evening stands out in my memory. We sat by the riverbank, watching the city lights reflect on the water. He turned to me suddenly and said, "Clara, one day I'll make enough to give you the world. But until then, I hope you let me give you my heart." I laughed, but my chest tightened. His words were raw, sincere. I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling his warmth against the cool night air.
For the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Not in the luxury of boutiques or the glitz of parties, but in the arms of a man who had nothing but love to give. Still, sometimes, when the nights grew too quiet, another voice whispered inside me, "Can love feed dreams? Can love pay bills?" I hated that voice. I wanted to bury it. But no matter how much I tried, it always returned. Back then, though, I silenced it because in David's presence, love felt like the only thing that mattered. At first, I thought love could shield me from everything. The pressure from my friends, the difference in our worlds, even my own quiet doubts. But slowly, like hairline fractures on glass, the cracks began to show. David was hardworking, no doubt. He poured his soul into his printing shop job and spent his nights sketching designs that he swore would one day change our lives. I admired him for that. But admiration doesn't pay rent. And each time he struggled to gather enough money for small things, bus fare, a decent meal, even buying me a birthday gift, I felt a sting. I hated myself for it, but I felt it all the same. Meanwhile, my friends paraded their lives in front of me. They wore new clothes, traveled, dined in fine restaurants. Their boyfriends drove them home in sleek cars while David and I walked. They never said it outright, but their eyes told the story. "Clara, you could do better." One night after a long day at the boutique, I found myself irritated at David. He had surprised me with roasted fish and wrapped in newspaper, proud of the bargain he had gotten. He expected me to smile, but all I could think was, is this really my life? I saw the hurt in his eyes when I didn't eat much. He didn't say a word, but the silence between us that night was heavier than any argument. It was then I realized love was beautiful, yes, but love was also fragile. And in the cracks of our reality, I began to see shadows of another life, one I secretly longed for. It was during one of those weary afternoons at the boutique that temptation first walked into my life. I had been replaying the same thoughts in my head. The unpaid bills, my friends' subtle jabs, the image of David trying so hard to give me what he didn't have. My heart loved him, yes, but my mind kept whispering, "Is this enough, Clara? Will it ever be?" And then, as if the universe wanted to mock me, Richard stepped through the boutique doors. He wasn't like the usual customers. His presence filled the room before he even spoke. Tall, confident, his suit cut perfectly to his frame. He looked like the kind of man who belonged to the world I had only ever admired from afar. He came in to shop for his sister, but his attention drifted to me. At first, I brushed it off. I was used to men with money throwing glances. But Richard wasn't just looking, he was studying me, as though he already knew my story. Before he left, he slipped his card into my hand. "If you ever want to see the city from higher than these windows, call me," he said with a smile that lingered. I told myself I wouldn't. I had David. I had love. But when my friends saw the card, they laughed. "Clara, you're wasting yourself. Look at you, beautiful and smart, yet stuck with a man who can barely afford dinner. A man like Richard, he can give you everything." Their words cut deeper than I admitted. Nights with David were warm, yes, but they were also filled with talk of someday and maybe one day. Richard, on the other hand, represented today. He was everything I thought I didn't need: wealth, security, a door to the life I secretly envied. I didn't call him that night, but I kept the card. And that, I think, was the first betrayal. I wish I could say I tore up Richard's card and never thought of him again, but the truth, I carried it with me like a secret flame. Each time David held my hand and spoke of dreams, I smiled, but inside I felt the weight of that small piece of paper in my purse. It was temptation whispering, "There's another life waiting for you, Clara. A life without struggle, a life of comfort." Richard made it even easier. He came back to the boutique more often than necessary,
Sometimes it was for gifts, sometimes only to say hello. He had a way of making me feel seen. Not the struggling Clara, not the David's Clara, but the woman I could be. Elegant, polished, living in a world of glass towers instead of dusty bus stops. And yet, every time I looked at David, my heart ached. He loved me in a way money could never buy. His touch was gentle, his eyes honest, his laughter unpolished but real. He would spend his last coin just to see me smile. How could I betray that? But then reality would strike. Rent unpaid, dreams still dreams. Nights where dinner was bread and tea while Richard's invitations echoed in my head. Rooftop dinners, weekend trips, promises of more. I stood between two worlds, my heart in one and my desires in the other. And for the first time in my life, I realized that love was not the easy path I once thought it was. The question haunted me day and night. Do I follow my heart, or do I choose the life I've always wanted?
The night I betrayed David, the air was heavy with silence. He had planned a small surprise for me. Nothing extravagant, just a dinner he cooked himself. The rice was slightly burnt, the meat tough, but the way he looked at me while serving it, it broke me. His eyes carried so much love, so much hope, and yet all I could think about was Richard's invitation waiting on my phone. After dinner, David walked me home as usual, his hand wrapped around mine, warm and certain, but my heart was somewhere else. I kept hearing Richard's words from earlier that day. Come with me tonight. Let me show you what life can really feel like. When David kissed my forehead at my gate, whispering, "One day, Clara, I'll give you more than this," I almost told him, almost. But instead I smiled weakly and watched him walk away, unaware he had already lost me. That night, I met Richard. The restaurant was lit with golden chandeliers, the kind I had only seen in magazines. The wine sparkled, the food melted on my tongue, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged in a world larger than David's promises. But while Richard spoke of vacations and investments, a part of me kept hearing David's laughter, raw and imperfect. I silenced it with another sip of wine. I told myself I wasn't abandoning David, just choosing a better future. But deep inside, I knew the truth. I was leaving love for luxury. And once the choice was made, there was no turning back. At first, being with Richard felt like stepping into another universe. His world was polished, extravagant, endless. Rooftop dinners, weekend trips, gifts I never imagined owning. They dazzled me. I smiled in every photo, wore every dress, laughed at every joke. To everyone watching, I was the woman who had finally leveled up. But behind the smiles, guilt clung to me like a shadow. Late at night, when the parties ended and the champagne lost its fizz, I would remember David. I would see his crooked smile, hear his voice telling me, "Clara, one day I'll give you the world." Sometimes I imagined him waiting for me outside the boutique, sketchbook in hand, eyes lighting up just because I arrived. Then I'd blink, and instead of David, there was Richard's driver holding open a car door, his face expressionless. Richard gave me everything I thought I wanted, but not once did his gaze carry the softness David's did. With Richard, I felt displayed, like part of his collection. With David, I had felt cherished. The worst part, David never begged me to stay. He didn't fight, didn't call, didn't show up at my workplace. He simply disappeared into silence. And that silence screamed louder than anything. The guilt grew heavier each day, no matter how much gold I wore on my wrist. I had chosen comfort, but at the cost of the only man who ever loved me without condition. And deep down, I already feared what I refused to admit. Maybe I had lost
far more than I had gained. Months passed, and I buried myself in Richard's world. I told myself I was happy. I told myself I made the right choice. But life has a cruel way of showing you the truth you try to ignore. One afternoon, while scrolling through my phone, I saw a post that made my breath catch. It was David. He was standing in front of a newly opened design studio, his arms crossed, his smile brighter than I had ever seen it. The caption read, "Dreams do come true. Grateful for the journey." I stared at the picture for a long time, my heart twisting. He looked different, more confident, more alive. The boy who once struggled to pay for roasted corn had become a man who carved his place in the world, and he had done it without me. The days that followed were torture. Everywhere I turned, someone was talking about his new business. His designs were gaining attention, brands were noticing him, and people praised his creativity. David was no longer the struggling dreamer I left behind. He was becoming everything he promised he would be. And I was still in Richard's shadow, still smiling for photos, still pretending. Seeing David's rise should have made me happy, but instead it broke something inside me, because I realized he hadn't needed me to grow, but I had needed him to feel alive. And in losing him, I had lost myself. I often lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying it all. The laughter on library steps, the sketches on scraps of paper, the warmth of David's hand around mine. Those memories cling to me like ghosts, refusing to let go. Richard still gives me everything money can buy: jewelry, vacations, clothes that sparkle under the lights. To the world, I am a woman who made it. But when the parties end and the lights fade, I am just Clara, a woman who chose wealth over love. Sometimes I imagine what life would look like if I had stayed. Would I be sitting beside David in his studio, proud of every design he creates? Would I be the woman he thanks in interviews, the one who stood by him when he had nothing? The thought cuts deep. The truth is painful but simple. I left love because I was afraid of struggle. I traded sincerity for security, passion for possessions. And though I gained comfort, I lost the only man who ever saw me, not for what I had, but for who I was. They say love is enough, but for me, it wasn't. Or maybe I wasn't enough for love. Now I live surrounded by everything I once thought I wanted, and haunted by the one thing I can never have again. David.